Hey everyone! Today I want to show you how to create this effect. I'm not entirely sure how to name it, but you could think of it as something like merging vellum flutes. For this setup, we'll use the vellum face attribute along with a slightly unusual setup I came up with. I hope you enjoy this short tutorial. I have seen this effect many times, but couldn't find any real tutorial for it, so I decided to look for my own solution. We'll start with the sourcing. Here I have manually scattered a few spheres and created a group called Big Bubbles for all of them. Each sphere then gets its own Vellum configure grains node. Inside the node, set it to create points from volume and change the type to flute. The important part is that each of these nodes of the Vellum configure grains node gets a different value for the face attribute. The face tells Vellum whether different flute sources should mix together or stay separated. So the idea is simple. At the start of the simulation, all bubbles are in different phases, and over the time we gradually give them the same phase value. So the initial setup should look something like this. And make sure every Vellum flute here has a different face attribute. So to animate the face attribute, we first create an attribute. I call that mobs fall off. It actually has nothing to do with mobs anymore. I originally tried a mobs fall off, but then switched to a different solution, but kept the name. So feel free to name it whatever you want. I just call it like that. Then here inside the subnet, we split the bubbles again, unpack them, and then animate the mobs fall off attribute. I start by randomly selecting some of the bubbles and give them a fall off value of around 8. After about 60 frames, I animate that value down to like below 2. It's important to have it below 2 because later on we will use that value to drive our face attribute. I then repeated this process for all of the single bubbles and just offsetted the animation a little bit. But basically it's always the same. It starts at around 8 or maybe 7 and ends below 2. Yeah, and just offset it like wherever you want so it looks cool. So if you watch the animation of the attribute, it should look something like this. So next step is to bring that attribute inside our solver. So let's dive in here. To get our attribute inside the DOP network, we can use the point function. Here we create first a new float called mobs. Then with the point, we create the function. With the 0, we direct to input 1, which is here called 0. Then we take the mobs fall off here and ptnum. Then we apply a very simple expression to change the phase. We just do if f at mobs is smaller than 2, I at phase equals 1. So in other words, every bubble with a fall off value below 2 gets the same phase, and all bubbles with that phase will start mixing together. After that, I add a bit of pop wind and a pop attract pulling everything toward the center, but only very slightly. Then comes another pop attract, which is very important. Here I use a condition that drastically increases the force scale for bubbles with a mobs fall-off value below 2. So if mobs is smaller than 2, the force scale will increase to 5. So what this does is at the exact moment a bubble gets the new phase and is ready to merge, it also gets strongly attracted towards the center, and so it gets pushed into the main bubble. So if everything is set up correctly, it should look something like this. And if you visualize the face attribute, it gets even more clear what's happening. Next, we move on to create a VDB out of it. It's not the cleanest solution, but in this case, it works pretty well, I think. It looks like a total mess, but it's okay. Here we split the points again based on their face attribute. So the first line here, the first string is the main bubble. We set here float from min value 1 to max value of 3.9. And this is where our main bubble will live in. So every point with a float outside of 1 to 3.9 will get blasted. So at frame 1, you will only see our main bubble, which already has the correct face attribute value. So we will repeat this for every single bubble. Here from 4 to 4.9, 5 to 5.9, 6 to 6.9, and so on. So each bubble lives in its own VDB and only joins the main VDB once it shares the same face value. I then create a VDB from particles, do some smooth and reshape operations to get it a clean look, and convert it back to polygons. So now you should see the main bubble. It gets the second bubble when it joins the same face, then the third, and so on. So if you merge them together, you see they don't share the same VDBs, so they don't connect. And that's very important for the look. So here you can see how it changes the face and then also changes the VDB. Finally, we just add some smaller bubbles. I do this by grouping and blasting most of the existing points. So just use a group node, set it to keep by random chance, and set the percentage of something like 1. And then blast most of them. Set an ID attribute. And then I added a little bit of motion with the mobs noise modifier. Then we use a nice little trick I saw once on a John Kunz tutorial or live stream from him to keep the bubbles away from the surface. For this, we take the VDB from our VDB creation here and use a attribute from volume and set the attribute from volume to surface and use the CD attribute. We then blast all CD point X which are bigger than 0. So what this does is blast all points which are outside of our main shape, outside of the surface. After that, we invert the CD by multiplying it by -1 and then set the p-scale equal to CD.x. This way, the closer the bubbles get to the surface, the smaller they become. Then we can use a attribute randomize to adjust the p-scale a little bit and use copy to points to add some spheres on the points. For rendering, I'm just using a very simple glass shader with a little bit of dispersion, a little bit of roughness, and a really low IOR. I also have a simple light setup with some backdrop. Let me know what you think and have a nice day. Bye bye.